I wanted people to learn about it, but not be given, a scientific lesson on it. It needed to come in a way that, made sense for the dialogue and did not distract the reader from enjoying the book.
Hey, Guy Powell here, and welcome to the next episode of the backstory on the Shroud of Turin. And if you haven't already done so, please visit guypowell.com and sign up for more of these episodes. As you know, I am the author of the book The Only Witness, which is a Christian historical fiction on the Shroud of Turin. And today we're speaking with Les Fredette, and he is also a Shroud author. And he has a new book out, which we're going to touch on a little bit. And he's also an occasional speaker on the Shroud. His book is titled The Shrouded Truth. The work that he does on the Shroud in his book, he blends the precision of an engineer with the imagination of a storyteller. He's a writer, photographer, educator, and innovator. And he spent years turning complex ideas into clear, actionable plans, whether that's architecting complex computer systems, guiding students through reading and math, or crafting page-turning fiction that mixes science, history, and high-stakes intrigues. When he's not teaching or building, he's behind the camera chasing compelling images in the natural world, or he's at the keyboard developing his thriller series, The Shrouded Truth, and I want to hear more about it. So he and I, it's hard to believe, but he and I have a very similar background. I was an engineer and I wrote a book. I'm fiction as well, and he's an engineer and he wrote a book. So looking forward to learning more. With Les, welcome. So good to have you.
Before we continue, I want to briefly tell you about my new book, The Only Witness. It's a work of Christian historical fiction rooted in years of serious research into the Shroud of Turin. The story traces what may have happened to the Shroud across 2,000 years of history through war, secrecy, faith, and survival. It puts you right into the story. If you're interested in the historical mystery behind the Shroud and its possible journey over the last 2 millennia, you can learn more and order your copy at guypowell.com or on Amazon. Now let's get back to the podcast.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's a great pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking forward to hearing more. So tell us your backstory on how you got involved in studying the Shroud.
Well, my mom was very Catholic. Took me to a few Catholic mission, not missionaries, but religious gatherings. One was in Notre Dame, and that was in my early 20s, and it was right around the time of the 1988 carbon dating testing, and it was a confluence. In the Catholic realm, the Shroud is much better known than in the other Christian Protestantism and Methodism and those sorts of things. So, which is more. My wife happens to be a Methodist, so I actually had to tell her about the Shroud because she'd never heard of it. So that's where I got my start, was my wife, or excuse me, my mother's interest in Catholicism and driving me down that road, and it just kind of all coalesced at the appropriate time.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, so I must be like your wife then. I'm a Methodist as well, and but I'd heard about the Shroud, just from the news, certainly going back to 1978, 79 when the original STURP was done, the night, 80s, I guess, early 80s, and then of course that fateful 1988, 89 publishing of the radiocarbon testing, and that certainly dashed, my interest for quite a few years, and then finally, in COVID, I said I'm going to get back into this, and I wrote my book over COVID, so that was kind of
Mm.
nice. So tell us a little bit about your book. Of course, no spoilers. Don't give away the plot, or too much of the plot, but tell us a little bit about the Shrouded Truth.
So it doesn't try to hide what has happened. It's kind of a little bit more in your face, in terms like Star Wars. You know that the Death Star plans have been stolen right off the bat, and they're not trying to hide anything. In the story, you find out right off the bat that the Shroud of Turin has been replaced with a duplicate. So the one that's in Turin is a fake, and has been a fake for 20 or so years, since the 1997 fire, when it was switched out for a remarkable duplicate. And the premise of the book is that there's the strong female character, Nicole McHenry, who is part of a team that's going to retest the shroud and do more carbon dating testing on it. And wow, that's just going to throw the plans of the people that have stolen the shroud for a very particular reason. It's interfering with their plans, which are coming to fruition, within the next several months. It's going to mess things up. So part of the antagonist's plan is to dissuade this testing from occurring, which leads down a road of Nicole and her husband getting drawn into this mystery and conspiracy at the highest levels of the church and which lead to just lots of really interesting, fun, exciting, fast-paced drama and thrill that happens as you follow primarily her, through this episode. And bad things happen, and it takes place in 3 acts. So there's some very definitive 3-part narration to it. And in the end, it winds up leading into a sequel. And it's designed to be a 3-part story. But I think I've done a tremendous amount of work creating characters that are very believable, very realistic. She is a wounded person. She is not some Jason Bourne, perfect, type of person that's out there being able to do everything. She's a person that's dealing with a lot of stress in her life, marital stress, and she needs her religion, but she also needs her science. And there's this conflict between the science and the faith. And she's Catholic, she's Irish Catholic. And so there's, a lot of that going on. And she draws a lot of strength from her husband, who in the book happens to be dyslexic. And we can talk about that as to why that is later. But they draw upon each other through the entire story. And, there's a lot of modeling as your first novel. You put a lot of yourself and people in characters. And so she and Liam are, kind of a mix of me and my wife. And they're not any stronger than me and my wife. This is the sort of thing I didn't want to have somebody that was in there, that again was like, Jason Bourne, and they're running around doing all sorts of things that are just impossible. These are real people, caught in this story. So that kind of gives you a little bit of a framework of it.
Yeah, fantastic. That's interesting, and you're so right. You end up, either putting your friends into the book, or your experiences and things that you've seen and experienced, and those become partial episodes or mini stories within the larger story, and relating that. So it's that sounds awesome. Now, one of the things that, as I recall, that you do is you introduce a lot of the different evidences of the shroud
Yep.
throughout the book. So tell us how what you did there, and what you see as maybe the most important ones.
Because she's going to be leading this 4 university team to do new carbon dating testing, she gets basically a brief, an RFP, a request for proposal, and she starts going through it, and she starts noticing all this stuff about the shroud. And so she starts having internal monologue about, how is this? How does this work? She works off of her husband, who is a mathematician and an art historian. It's like, how is this possible? What about this? What about this? What about this? They go back and forth. And so in 3 or 4 places in the book, she's having these types of discussions with her husband and herself internally. At one point, she's having a discussion with this woman on the plane when she's going over to Turin, playing kind of the devil's advocate with the woman. And so that's kind of how it gets teased out in these little snippets of of dialogue, to bring forth all those interesting things. Again, probably the most, there's so many things, but I think the main thing to me and to her in the book is just how impossible it would be for somebody in the 1300s, if it was created by an artist in the 1300s, is to know all the things that you would need to know in order to create this thing. And, it's one thing, and we kind of talk about it in the book, the people that forge it have the benefit of they don't care. They don't care how it may or may not have happened. They're just going to recreate it using today's technology as they see fit. So if they need to know how big a Roman flagrum is, they can go and search it on the internet and figure out exactly how big and how they might have used it, and whether it's or blood flows or blood serum or whatever it is. They could just look it up on the internet, or go get a specialist that knows about it. How did a person in the 1350 or whatever sit down before science really was invented, before there was really access to books, before you wouldn't be burned at the stake for even thinking of creating a naked Jesus? It doesn't make any sense. And so that, to me, that's in the book and myself, that is the biggest mystery. Is that it's impossible as far as I can tell. There's just no way that somebody could have all that knowledge and then throw it away. And then whatever technique that they used, even if it was a sculpture, even if somebody had, as they say, it was a bas relief, and they had a sculpture and they laid it. Where'd the sculpture go? Who is this amazing, person that, Michelangelo Jr. that created the bas relief? No, it doesn't make any sense. Things don't appear and disappear like that in that way. You have residuals, you have things that lead up. You have, in art, if you look at art, in those times, there's a progression of the quality of art and how things were depicted. Things just don't pop up and then disappear like that.
Right, right. Well, Barry Schwartz, and to your point, Barry Schwartz said it would have been more of a miracle to have forged it or created it in the 13th or 14th century than to have, seen it been created as part of the resurrection. So either
Right,
way, it would
exactly.
have to have been miraculous. Yeah, yeah, exactly.
You're trying
So,
to convince me by the end of this that it's 100% real. I still have to have the last bit of the hanging of, yeah, but I don't know
yep.
everything. No matter how much the world surprises me, especially today, where things that you would think would never happen. So, I've considered myself over the last 4 or 5 years to become not an expert on anything, because everything that seems to have made sense in the first 55 years of my life do not apparently seem to make sense anymore.
Yeah. And it's so funny too, and that even applies to the science. So, for example, the state or the capability of blood testing and DNA testing and even other things like that have gotten better. And
Yep.
so, even, when you think about, well, it used to be said that it was type AB blood that was on the shroud. And now, based on the most recent kind of testing and sciences, is that it could have been A, or it could have been B, or it could have been AB, because both A and B blood degrade
Mm.
into AB blood. And when you run the modern tests on it, it can only find out, those specific antigens or whatever they are on there. and it can only say that it found AB blood, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it wasn't degraded in some
Hmm.
fashion. So, to your point, even the testing processes get better and change over time.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So in the book, do you go over things where you say like, this evidence is more persuasive than some other evidence as it relates to the authenticity of the shroud?
No, no, that would get. Matter of fact, I had to wean out a lot of the original um, information dump. It was too. Uh, it sounded. It was getting on the way of the plot. I wanted people to learn about it, but not be given, a scientific lesson on it. It needed to come in a way that made sense for the dialogue and did not distract the reader from enjoying the book.
Mm,
The things that I thought were the most interesting, to stay in the book.
yeah, yeah. Well, you've got two more books to add them back in, I guess.
That is true. The this book is much more. The first book is much more founded in reality. The second book is going to be a little bit more. They find something encoded in the shroud that then becomes a danger to the church.
Mm,
Um, but that is something that doesn't exist. Although you see people that say, "Oh, we found this writing, on the shroud, or we found this flower on the shroud," and pareidolia of, like, "Oh, look, this looks just like that." I mean, there still is some of that. This has more to do with mathematics and some quantum stuff, and
yeah.
so it really is at that point fiction. And the third book, which is about her twins that she winds up having, which are mentioned in the first book. The third book is about her twins and their connection to the shroud. And
Mm,
again, becoming so they'll probably be still working out, the plot on that one. The second one's about a third done, and the
yeah.
plot in the third one is just, it's kind of hanging in there, but it's getting more, a little bit more fantastical, as you kind of, go down through the series. Because no one's going to just hang on to, a repeat of more interesting information about the shroud as far as,
Right.
type of a thriller. There may be some opportunities to continue to throw in some education here and there. Again, like the idea that, hey, there is other stuff that's encoded in the shroud that people talk about now, in that second book as a corollary to what they find,
Right, right,
you
right.
know.
Exactly. So yeah, it's so when I wrote mine, I had way too much stuff. And it's kind of like, well, in mine it's kind of a history over the 2000 millennia, a historical fiction. So I have all these little stories and vignettes and things like that. And I ended up having to cut out a bunch of them because they were, the length of the book was just too much. And
Mhm.
so I've got enough material to do, some other stuff, and one of these days I'll hopefully get back to it. One of the challenges, though, when you're writing about the shroud and science is how you, and if you're a person of faith, how you weave faith into it, and how did you do that? Do you have any thoughts on the faith piece of the books?
So Nicole is very strongly religious, and her husband is more like me, which is spiritual religious. And so they definitely play off each other, and get into several fights in the book about him not taking her as seriously as he should. So when she's saying, "Hey, look at this, the limestone dust, that's found on the shroud, and it can only be found, in Jerusalem," And he's like, yeah, well, that sounds like happy circumstances. He's like, look, are you not taking me seriously? Because you're being sarcastic. Because there is a little mysticism in the book, and it leaves the reader to decide whether or not that she has really had an experience with the shroud or she has not had an experience with the shroud. And it's up to the reader to decide whether or not they're really, she did or didn't. From her perspective, she absolutely did have a particular experience with the shroud, which I won't spoil as to what it is.
Hmm.
From his point of view, he's just playing along as the husband, and he supports her, but he doesn't necessarily believe it. And so I think it is very difficult for someone of faith and someone that is very scientific to reconcile the two. Almost not ignore it, but I just simply leave it as the open question and just not try to solve the puzzle, because I don't think right now it's solvable. I don't think you can say with everything one way or the other. And I would hate to commit myself to one way or the other, and be wrong. As a husband, I'm wrong way too much as it is. So from what I can control, I'm probably 90% of the way that it's authentic and it was created by some process that we don't understand back in the first century. Whether that means that was a resurrection event, that's still up in the air. If I went down that path, I would be in church every single week. And I haven't gotten down that path yet.
Well, we'll have to see if we can get you there. How did the writing of the book affect your faith? Did it make it stronger, weaker, or stayed the same?
No, I think it pretty much stayed the same because like I said, I've kind of been doing this for 40 years of going, down the same pathway. I've never made a commitment one way or the other. I've always had my strong beliefs that it is inexplicable. And I've always had my strong beliefs that, yeah, but there must be an explanation. And you think about other relics or other things that we've studied. There really is nothing like the shroud in terms of the amount of time and research that has gone into it. Well, I'll throw that out. I'll say, yeah, it's kind of like dark energy or dark matter. There's a lot of research into it. We still could be 100% wrong. It's either there, like dark matter. It could still simply be an equation. Newton's laws are not quite right, and there's some bit of the equation that we're not taking into account, or light has the speed of light has changed over the time of the universe, and that could account for certain observations. So it's kind of in that category of like, there's a lot of evidence on both sides, but in the end, no one kind of really knows.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's certainly true that exactly the process and everything is definitely up in the air. You have one or two main characters. What are some of the antagonist characters? What are their feelings toward the divine origin of the shroud or not?
So you have one that is really, I'm the heir to the Templar, reign, and the shroud is something that's going to give me that power. And then you've got, because there's kind of like a collusion of several people, and the main protagonist, who is a billionaire zealot who kind of funded all of this stuff. And he's the first character introduced in the book, much like Darth Vader being introduced at the very beginning of Star Wars. That he's there, and he's firmly believed that this thing is like the second coming. That Jesus never physically walked on the earth, that it was the shroud that the disciples saw and believed, and that Thomas put his fingers in Jesus's wound. It wasn't really Jesus, it was the shroud. And he believes that the second coming is the shroud being brought to its full glory to the world, and he is bound and determined to, to make this happen. So the and nothing ends well with protagonists in most stories, and although in this story things don't end well for some of them, but things end pretty well for other ones, which actually leads into the second book, which is a really interesting twist, which will be quite different than I think most people would ever expect. Certainly
Yeah.
not something I expected when I started to write. Matter of fact, I had to rewrite the end of the book to facilitate the second book, which
Yeah,
was something as my brother says, and I'm sure he quoted it from somewhere else, that great books are not written, they're edited.
yeah, how true that is. It's so funny
Yeah.
too. One of the challenges that you have when you have to rewrite something, and I like what you did, you have a plan for the second book as you're finishing off the first one. And but when I rewrote something in mine, it's hard not to make a mistake,
Oh,
because you edit something out and then all of a sudden it's referenced, 2 pages later and you go, oh no, and I got to fix that. And it just
yep.
kind of snowballs. It's pretty tough.
I don't know how people did it without the power of word processing.
I know. And just doing it by hand and doing it on expensive paper. If at some point it was on vellum or something like that, how do you do it? I just don't know.
No.
So now there is a goal for the protagonists and the antagonists at the end of the book. So one of the things that kind of comes to mind is the ends justifying the means.
Mhm.
How does that kind of play into the plot and the storyline?
Well, interestingly, a lot, and what's I never expected to happen, but did happen, was at the end of the book, um, protagonists and antagonists, sometimes their views are hard to distinguish between. And it is the methodology by which that they're trying to go about something that differentiates the two of them. And, the ends justify the means. A lot of people believe that violence or, not being good, not taking the short, narrow path, can be justified if the ends are worth it. And it does at the end of the book become a little bit muddied between the antagonist and the protagonist as to, well, were they really wrong? You know, and so that is actually, again, leads into the second book where the lines really kind of things get flipped on their heads as to who's right and who's wrong and what are people willing to do if they're pushed far enough.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. So now one other thing is you mentioned the Nag Hammadi scrolls
Mhm.
and that they're in there. So tell us how that relates to the storyline.
As I mentioned, at one point in the book, she plays devil advocate with a woman on the airplane as she goes to Turin, and the woman happens to be talking and reading a book about the Nag Hammadi scrolls. So they talk a little bit about it with regards to, is that like the Shroud? She's like, oh, no, 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 no. These are, these Gnostic type of uh, teachings. But what's interesting is, as it winds up happening, is kind of in the second book, pulling that thread through, there is parts of the Nag Hammadi scroll lore, gospel, that is being pulled through into the second book. And that was, again, that sort of thing was never planned when I wrote that. I think I wrote that section of the book probably 10 years ago. as it turns out, there's and that's fascinating about writing just in general, how you can weave stories. And I taught writing, a lot, and worked with a lot of kids and adults on different types of writing. And so um story weaving has always been something that I can do in my head very easily. And so to pull kind of these different pieces, even though they weren't planned, I find it exciting. It's like finding you're going out to this park, and I think it's like Arkansas, where you can go and like look for diamonds in this national park. I think it's like
Yep.
Diamond National Park. And like you find a diamond. To me, finding something like that in the book is saying, oh, I can use that. I never intended to, but oh, this is so good. This is gonna be so cool. And I love that about writing. And when you find something like that and you can pull it in and use it, and you're like, oh, I'm so smart. um,
Exactly. And same thing with me. And when I wrote mine is, oh, I can put that in there. Oh, how can I change that to be interesting? And you're so right. It really it makes it a lot of fun when you
mhm.
find a little nugget like that or a couple of them. Well, this is fantastic. So the book is The Shrouded Truth by Les Fredette. Any last words you'd like to mention before we close off?
So, like all good authors, I have created a website, llfredette.com. And, I've got my books up there. Well, you can pre-order, you can order the Shrouded Truth, the first book. You can pre-order the following. Second one should be out in July, and the third one should be out in February next year.
Hmm. Right.
Um, and of course, I've created some merch, and Shroud fan since 33 AD. That's kind of the little moniker. And I'm actually kind of wearing my giant
Yeah.
Jesus. Yeah, that's the tough thing, is actually, because obviously I want to drive people to the website,
Right.
you know, for um, for lots of reasons, because I want to have a presence that's outside of Amazon and Barnes and Noble and whatnot.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and so are you on Amazon as well, or just on the website, or?
On Amazon.com, and
Uh-huh.
also through, just about at this point, you can go to almost any print, Barnes and Noble or books.org or whatever they are. Went through a service that basically pushed out the print version to all the places. I stayed, and publishing is so difficult. It's so not difficult. It's confusing. It's like, should I
Yeah.
just go with Amazon? Should I go over here? Right now, I'm doing the Amazon exclusive with the ebook for 90 days,
Yep.
so that I can read them on Amazon Unlimited. You know, um,
Right.
but so far, right now, the traction has been with friends. It came out a month ago, and so pretty much the only people that kind of really know about it are my friends. I just did an article, got published in the local paper, and doing the podcast. I'll be doing some meetings,
Yeah.
book signings and stuff like that.
Hmm.
So, you know,
Well, having the second and the third book will help sales overall. So best of luck to you. I'm sure it'll be very successful. It sounds like an interesting book, and I'm definitely gonna look forward to reading it. So well, Les, really appreciate it. And again, thank you for participating. It's really fascinating to see all of the different aspects of people related to the shroud, whether it's scientific and research oriented or now research oriented, but putting together a fictional story and very much like my own. And oh, and I needed to ask you, what kind of an engineer were you?
computer science. My
Okay.
last job was at Electric Boat, working on the new Columbia nuclear ballistic submarine.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So if they
Well, I was
press the
an
button, if they press the button to end the world, yeah, that was my button.
well, hopefully they won't do that.
Hopefully they will not use that screen.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I was an electrical engineer, and actually that kind of morphed as well into the computer sciences. So fantastic. Well, thank you very much. Really appreciate it, Les. And for the audience, please stay tuned for many other videos in this series on the backstory on the Shroud of Turin. And if you'd like to, please rate this one with 5 stars. Really appreciate it, Les, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too.